I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
I saw this community rally around me to get me a tent, to donate me blankets, to show me what it meant to survive on the streets.
That's scholar and activist Terence Lester discussing his new book, From Dropout to Doctorate, Breaking the Chains of Educational Injustice.
Being vulnerable has been a safe haven for me. It's made me a more transparent leader, and it has given me such courage to continue to show up and serve those around me.
We discuss Terence's moving life story, the meaning of community, and how his organization Love Beyond Walls is changing the narrative.
My work is greater than a political conversation. It's about a moral one. It's about how do we do the right thing and show up as a good neighbor.
All coming right up. If you love No Small Endeavor, I suspect you will not want to miss joining us in Nashville for our Thanksgiving variety show on November 23. This year, we'll be joined by Sharon McMahon, #1 New York Times bestselling author and podcaster. Sharon is a longtime government and law educator who became known as America's government teacher during the 2020 election when she went viral for breaking down complex topics with a steadfast commitment to the facts. It'll be a night of thoughtful conversation, moving music, and a room full of folks all in pursuit of no small endeavor. This year it's at the beautiful Skirmerhorn Symphony Center here in Nashville. We'll be joined by the Choir Room, Grammy award-winning artist Allison Russell, and a full band for an amazing night you will not want to miss. Mark your calendars for November 23, and don't wait. Go get your tickets now at the link in the show notes or at nosmallendeavor.com/events. I can sometimes find it a challenge to get to sleep. I need to make sure to do my bedtime reading, practice a bit of gratitude for the gifts of the day, and then I intentionally relax the muscles in my face. And then it's so exquisitely pleasurable to have our set of Bowl and Branch's signature sheets. They're made free from toxins with the finest 100% organic cotton. They come with a 30-night worry-free guarantee and are ethically crafted by expert artisans that earn fair wages. I loved the way they felt when I pulled them out of the package, and I love the way they feel as I drift off to sleep. So why tarry? Feel the difference an extraordinary night's sleep can make with Bowl and Branch. Get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets at bowlandbranch.com/NSC. That's Bowl and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/NSC to save 15% and unlock free shipping. Exclusions apply.
Hey, Annie F. Downs here from the That Sounds Fun Network. You know what I love about fall? It's the perfect mix of cozy comfort meals and cheering on football with friends. Go Dogs, sick 'em. Weeknights we can get busy and dinner time calls for something quick but really good. That's why I love Omaha Steaks, because whether it's a cozy dinner at home or burgers on the grill before the game, they've got me covered. Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience, from handcrafted steaks to comfort favorites. Their filet mignon is so tender, perfectly marbled, and better than most steaks you can get out at a restaurant. The best part, it's all in the freezer, ready whenever you need it. I've been eyeing those smash burgers and chicken wings, perfect for game day. This is heartland quality food, aged for maximum tenderness, hand cut by master butchers, and shipped right to your door. They've been doing this since 1917, 5 generations of uncompromising quality. And it's not just steaks. They've got juicy burgers, chicken, pork, seafood, even desserts. So get fired up for your fall grilling with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com and you're going to get 50% off site-wide during their Red Hot Sale event. And for an extra $35 off, you can use the promo code FUN at checkout. Like that sounds fun. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $35 off with the promo code FUN, F-U-N, at checkout. See site for details.
I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. For decades, I've encouraged students in various ways to dare live an adventuresome life, and I've marveled at the courage of those daring souls who want to take life in carpe diem-like fashion, especially when they do so not for the sake of consumerist indulgence, but in an effort to get at what life at its best is all about.
I remember my family dropping me off underneath a bridge in the heart of Atlanta.
This is Terence Lester.
It was in December, and as a matter of fact, it was 3 days before Christmas.
Terence had previously announced on social media that he would be undertaking an experiment to live outside beyond the walls of his home.
And the goal was to raise awareness about what it means to be an unhoused person every single second, not just in someone passing by and you seeing someone on the streets without an address for a brief moment of time. But I wanted to walk through those experiences and then answer the question, how might I serve this population and stand in solidarity with them?
Terence was once a high school dropout. Now he has a PhD and is a professor at Simmons College in Kentucky, a scholar, an activist, author of 5 books, and founder of a nonprofit called Love Beyond Walls. Welcome, Dr. Lester.
Hey, Lee. Really excited to be here today.
Pleased to have you with us and grateful for your time. And I'm fascinated with this experiment that you did in 2013. When you think back to that experience, I would love first just a glimpse of what are some of the sensory experiences that you remember from that experiment?
When I first arrived, I had already established relationships with this community. And I'll never forget this gentleman named Robert walking up to me. He greeted me. He walked me around. He introduced me to the community. And everybody just welcomed me. And it was so humbling because here it was, I was an outsider coming into this community. It was freezing cold. And I saw this community rally around me to get me a tent, to donate me blankets, to get me a pair of socks when my feet got wet and cold, to talk to me about their own vulnerabilities and their sufferings, to show me what it meant to survive on the streets. But I remember building relationships with my friends who couldn't afford medication, with my friends who was living on the streets with a terminal illness, with my friends who lost jobs or were living with a disability. And I got a chance to tell these beautiful stories, not of people who should be invisible, but of people who were deserving of love and compassion. And it literally shaped the way that I serve, my heart, my compassion, but it also informed the start of our organization, which is Love Beyond Walls, dedicated to serving those who are unhoused. And with that one campaign, we were able to get 14 people off of the streets through reuniting people with their family members, through connecting them with services. And that's when I really started to see the power of storytelling and how it could be used to serve those who are invisible.
So in your forthcoming book, you share a lot about your own narrative and the ways in which your own story has led you to the sort of solidarity that you're seeking to embody in your own life. But I was particularly struck by the story that you tell of kind of a very early experience of coming to your own self-perception with a conversation that your mother had on the phone. Would you share that story with us?
Yeah, it was early 90s, and as a very young child, I had to be like 9 or 10 years old. And I hear my mother frantic. Her voice is crackling. And she's talking to another family member, and it's about something that's happening in real time on the news. They were reporting that Rodney King had just been beaten by law enforcement, and she was making statements that let me know that I was a Black child, essentially. And I'll never forget the long ride to school. She dropped me off, and I kept having these questions. What does it mean to be a Black boy growing up in the community that we're growing up in? What does it mean to go to a school? I started to notice the environment that I was growing up in, the way that race was being talked about. It did something to me. It let me know that sometimes growing up in these types of environments was synonymous with living with fear, right? Especially during that time frame. And it also let me know that something was different in the world and that I would experience a certain set of circumstances that may be different from others who matriculate through this life.
Throughout the book, you're working with lots of notions of generational trauma, which we'll have an opportunity to discuss hopefully here in a few moments. But pointing back to your own early experiences with your mother and sister having to leave your house and the sort of rise of anxiety in you, how do you look back on that experience? What do you remember about that experience and what it enkindled in you?
Yeah, I still feel the emotions of that experience. I was growing up in what would be considered a impoverished community. I mean, we've all passed by these communities where it may be a food desert or dilapidated buildings, or you can sense the divestment where there isn't a lot of thriving there. Poverty itself produces crime, and you can imagine people who are fighting for survival are grappling with, how do I make ends meet? And sometimes those choices may result in crime for survival. All of these things are going on. And here it is, my mother is fleeing, so to speak. There was a lot of social conflict and family angst and violence stemming from my home life. And my mother grabbed me and my younger sister at the time. And I remember this long walk that we were taking away from our home. And I think for me, that was the first time I really grappled with, what does it mean to be at home? What is home? I define home in my book, I See You, as a place where you feel seen, accepted, and you feel this sense of belonging. And home, or this idea or concept of home, was really shattered in many ways early on in my life. And I spent the next years growing as a young Black male in society where you're grappling with maybe social injustice, being in an impoverished community, also dealing with trauma. I would call them a trifecta of things, really started to shape me and impact even my own educational outcomes.
How old were you at that particular time with your mother fleeing from those sorts of difficulties?
Yeah, I was maybe 5 or 6, and the memories are just as fresh today as they were when they were happening.
When you've looked back at the rise of persistent anxiety that you then later would deal with and work on in therapy, looking back in retrospect, what would you say was the nature of that? What were the sorts of persistent ways of trying to deal with the world, of questioning the world, of engaging the world that began to be enkindled in you, you think, at that time?
I mean, trauma itself can be a really impactful thing. And I normally tell people now, to be alive is to experience trauma. Like, you don't escape this life having had dealt with something. And that something could be different from somebody else's something. For me, it was impoverishment, where some researchers or clinicians, right, will argue that poverty itself is a form of trauma. It's traumatic to not know where you're going to sleep at night when your mother is fleeing from maybe a domestic violence situation. It's traumatic when you see your single parent work multiple jobs and their absence is felt because they're trying to make it to survive. It's traumatic when you have to go to school and you're being taught a particular subject, but you can't connect with it fully because you're dealing with your existential reality stemming from your home life. And educators aren't really trauma informed to be able to notice that something deeper is going on, right? And I dealt with all of those things. I remember one incident, and I talk about it in my book, where I had gone to school one morning and I was mute in a sense. The night before, I just witnessed violence that was traumatic for me. And I'm in class, and I remember my teacher going over a lesson, and she's going around the classroom and she's asking students to answer the question. And I couldn't say anything. It's not because I did not want to. It's because I had so much stemming from my own personal life that I didn't feel the full weight of confidence to connect with education in that way. And instead of the teacher asking me what's wrong or what happened, she makes me move my desk into a closet. And I still hear the laughter of my peers. I had to be about first or second grade. My peers laughing at me as I was moving my desk into a closet, and she closed the door. And she did not even understand that she was re-traumatizing me, which was the start of what I would consider educational injustice. So when you ask me questions about how does that shape you, trauma itself can impact every aspect of your life.
You share how you at least go looking for some sort of sense of solidarity and some sort of sense of family and a gang membership, which again seems to be yet another form of traumatic experience for you.
Yeah, I after experiencing all that, now I'm in middle school. I'm disconnecting from education because I don't feel like teachers really understand. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to connect with someone, a community. And I sought that out in peers who had just moved from across the country, and they brought gang culture. And that was on the rise during that time. And the way that I saw being affiliated with the gang was not necessarily because I wanted to do something that was devious in society. It was that I wanted to connect with people who saw value in me as being a part of a community.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Dr. Terence Lester. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in this episode and a full transcript. We would be delighted if you'd tell your friends about No Small Endeavor, invite them to join us on the podcast, because doing so helps extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world. Coming up, Dr. Lester and I discuss the road to further education, the mentors who supported him, and the community who helped him heal. It has been so delightful to see more and more listeners like you sign up for NSC Plus. Our growing community is made up of intelligent and thoughtful people looking for a holistic approach to human flourishing. Signing up for NSC Plus is also a way to support the show and the work we're doing, and in fact, we depend upon that kind of support. But in addition to supporting the show, you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, and the No Small Endeavor you've come to love will be completely ad-free. In fact, you won't even hear ads like this one. So go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus to become a member of our community today. Join for as little as $5 a month. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com, click on that red button that says Join NSC Plus to become a member today.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
You share at one point about an unhoused friend that had a profound impact upon you, which I thought was a beautiful story.
Yeah. I was in high school at this point, and by this time I had fallen behind. I was transferred to an alternative school, and this alternative school was called Open Campus, which means you go to school, you work at your own pace. There's an educator present in the classroom, but it's an open campus. You can come and go as you please. You know, some teenagers there were working jobs. Some were living out of their cars. Some were staying in shelters. Some were so impoverished they were dealing with their own circumstances. I would describe it as a school with students who were all journeying through something very hard. But that hardness for me was almost like a breaking point. And I remember being in class and just feeling so disconnected from school. And I pushed myself away from the desk in front of the teacher. I get up, I walk out the classroom. A few of my friends followed. I walked straight out of the school building. And I'm walking away, and there was this guy experiencing homelessness. He calls over to our group. We had to be less than 100 yards away from the school. And he's stumbling around, trash hanging from his beard. Clothes looked like they hadn't been changed in probably a month. And I was the only person to respond. I walk over to him and he says, "I don't want any money." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he points back at my school and he says, "Is that your school back there?" And I say, "Yes." He says, "Whatever you do, you don't want to end up like me." And he looks himself up and down. He says, "Whatever you do, you're going to have to keep fighting to get your education, because one day you'll be a leader." Just like out of the blue, this total stranger. And he had no idea that, you know, I had run away from home, experienced a brief moment of homelessness, lived from friend's house to family member's house. He had no idea that I struggled early on with my relationship with my father that later was repaired. I talk about it in the book. He had no idea how I felt out of touch with education. But that moment, that brief moment, became the catalyst of God doing something amazing in my life. I heard him, right? This total stranger who saw something in me and was calling me a leader, even in the midst of my grief and my context. And that became the stepping stone for me to say, there is more to this life.
When you think back to those years, who are other figures that in some way, grand or simple, that gave you some sort of grace or some sort of encouragement that made it possible for you to find a way forward?
Miss West, Sharia West, she was a teacher that became one of my greatest sources of inspiration. Ended up going back to high school as a fifth-year senior. Most embarrassing moment of my life. The proper term is fifth-year persister, and sometimes you have six-year persisters. And so I went back, and I remember the educators who labeled me and thought that I would end up dead, locked up, or in jail. I remember the chatter from educators. "What is he doing back here?" I remember my peers laughing at me walking down the hall. "Didn't you graduate the year before? What happened?" But I had learned that if I was going to make it and become that leader that this gentleman who was unhoused told me that I would become, that I would have to persevere in a different way. And I remember Miss West, I was taking geometry, 10th grade class as a fifth-year senior. I would go to school and I had so much pain, emotional trauma, and I would sit in her class and I knew all of the information. It wasn't that I didn't have the intellectual capacity. It was just that I had so much heaviness that I was carrying. And she noticed that. And she walked up to me one day and she says, "Stay with me after class." I stayed. She says, "I want you to use this classroom as a sanctuary. I'll mentor you. I'll tutor you. I'll help you get through. But you're a young, Black, brilliant young man, and you're going to make it." And she called me a leader. And she became my greatest source of inspiration. My mom, who showed me tough love, who believed that better was possible. She saw that education was a way out for me. She pushed me sometimes in tough ways, but she continued to believe that I could overcome. And I think a large part of it's a mixture of my resilience comes from both my mother and my father. Mr. Eason, who was a deacon in the church that I later started attending, heard my story when I was 21 and I was thinking about going to Bible college, who actually helped to pay for my undergrad degree. He was a real estate developer, very wealthy man, but wanted to invest in me because at that time I was doing poetry around the church and serving. And he said that there was something special about me. He's the same guy that walked my wife down the aisle when her dad was in jail. And he passed away a couple of years ago. And the last text he sent me is that he was proud of the man that I've become. And I was one of his greatest investments. And here it is. It's this guy who built subdivisions and developed all of these buildings and apartment complexes and owned all this property. And he saw that the greatest call of God was to invest in people. And I was one of them. Mr. Moore, who sat me down when I was 17, the night I was going to sleep in a park, who told me to come over to his house to get dinner, who walked up to my car and told me that I was more than my circumstances and that one day I would use my story to encourage other people navigating these same sets of circumstances, who encouraged me to start Love Beyond Walls, who passed away. All of these people, my professor, Dr. Joe, who allowed me to borrow his car for a year when I was in Bible college, trying to find my way just so I can go to school. These strangers who became family. And I think one of my greatest joys now, even in the work that I do, is that now I get to become that same stranger that sees the best in people who've been isolated, who've been made invisible, who feel outcasted, who has a set of circumstances that no one understands, to live in a way, to show up in a way, to remind people that they are worthy of the love of God.
What was the role of the church or the role of your faith or coming to faith or whatever that narrative was? How did that play out in your younger self?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the community itself was a space that gave me a chance to heal, to realize how important faith was and how God saw value in me despite everything that I had to navigate, grow up with, my social location, the limitations. I'll never forget, I had a friend, and I write about it in a book. He was only going to church to date a girl, and he invited me, and I said, yeah. And I go to this men's Bible study, and this pastor, really passionate about community issues, all of these things, and he's preaching about the grace of God and how God loved us despite all that we face. And then I started to realize that church was a place that could become a safe space, a place of lament, a place where I could grow and gain wisdom from people who've journeyed through life. And I was a younger guy too, and a lot of my friends weren't necessarily connected to church. So I started hanging out with people twice my age, gleaning wisdom from deacons and asking questions. I normally tell young people today that the best thing that you can become is a questionary, right? Not just a visionary, but someone who dares to ask the hard questions from people who have made mistakes or had successes. And I did that because I did not have people in my life at the time who could teach me how to tie a tie or teach me what books to read or teach me these types of things based on the environment that I came from. And man, church changed my life. It gave me hope. It gave me faith. It restored me. I met my wife. My family is the most important thing to me. My kids, we get a chance to serve them in a way where we're tearing down what we would perceive as generational limitations, right? But I got all of that in church, right? How to be a man, how to grow up and have integrity, how to have character, how to serve. We talked about Jesus in a way that opened my eyes, that made me realize I have something to offer. And that was born out of the pain that I experienced.
I'm still stuck on some of those pictures that you shared with us of all this heavy weight you're carrying with you, say, to school and grappling with stopping, starting, whether to keep going, how to keep going. And I'm wondering, what would you identify as key elements that gave you, in the end, enough grit or enough persistence to keep on going rather than just lying down in despair or lying down in self-pity?
It's a great, great question. And I would say community. And you'll notice that it's not a large community. I'm not talking about a room full of people. It's the strangers that became family. It's the Mr. Easons. It's the Miss Wests. It's people who allowed me to borrow their courage and belief until I had my own. And sometimes I realized throughout the journey that I just had to remain open and listen. And sometimes that takes courage, especially for someone who's experienced a certain level of trauma, because your trust is kind of broken. It's funny that you asked that question. I was asked here recently, what would I tell my younger self who was caught in that place or that cycle? And my response was simple, is that you will find the community that believes in you. You will develop the confidence that you need to continue to take steps. You will find the courage and have your gifts and talents discovered in a way where you can serve your community. You do have something to offer the world, and nothing that you've gone through has the power to limit you. And I think I started to believe that based upon the community that I was connected to, people reminding me that your trauma, your suffering, your limitations, the poverty, the systemic injustice, all of those things do not have the power to define you. And I definitely think being connected to the right community is one of the greatest things that has changed the trajectory of my life. And not only my life, but my children's life.
In a great deal of your work, and in this book in particular, you're talking a lot about generational trauma. Give us just a short 1 to 2 sentence definition of generational trauma.
I think it's 2 parts. It can be historical trauma as well as personal trauma, right? And I think one can feed the other. For instance, my grandmother, who grew up in the 1930s, born in 1932, remembers the history, right, of not being able to go to certain parts of town, et cetera, working in certain stores. That's historical trauma that Black people carry based upon the history in this country. And then there's social or personal trauma. It's what you experience as a result of historical things. It can be impoverishment. It can be a form of abuse. It can be a limited mindset or mentality. It can be the ways in which you catch things that are modeled or displayed to you. And I think in my mind, they can be separated, but the way that I'm talking about them in the context of the book is that one is actually feeding the others. Because I talked to my dad before he passed, and he talked about how he grew up. That gave me a chance to humanize him and understand some of the choices that he made based upon the history. If I had to define generational trauma, I'm talking about a set of harmful experiences that can be passed down from generation to generation until those things are broken.
So the nature of them being passed down, do you see that primarily in terms of attitudes towards engagement with the world, or what would be the particulars that you have especially paid attention to as to how those traumas get passed from one generation to the next?
Just take, for instance, education, right? My dad didn't go to college and didn't finish school. He grew up in the 60s, 70s, was in an impoverished environment in DC. And the trauma of being in that context produced this limited perspective of the power of education. My dad eventually became an entrepreneur and became successful at what he did, but he experienced a trauma in his life based upon his social location, the historical injustices that were invasive in that community during that time frame, the way that schools were underfunded, the community that he lived in that produced educational outcomes that weren't as beneficial to him. That could have been passed along, right? Where maybe I didn't finish high school, or maybe I didn't believe that education has the power to do or create opportunities or grow me in ways like that could have been passed down. That's just something as simple. And what if I didn't finish high school? Would that have been passed down to my children, right? And that type of cycle can be passed down from generation to generation. And that's just one thing. I do want to shout out to my dad. My dad passed away last year. He actually became one of my best friends towards the latter part of his life. I was there when he was making his transition. He allowed me to become his caregiver. He allowed me to see him vulnerable. I was there when he gave his life to the Lord. I have audio recordings of him saying the way that I lived my life and what I overcame gave him the faith to believe in God. And I still listen to that to this day. He was there to call me doctor when I actually finished my PhD and tell people who were over to my house that he was proud of me. You talk about generational trauma, but I also see that as an opportunity for generational healing, that my dad was able to see me achieve something that he never got a chance to. It's a really powerful thing. And he is still reaching people through me, and I want to honor him as well.
Coming up is a short break, followed by our discussion on public policy, Terence's work at Love Beyond Walls, and the enduring power of vulnerability.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
It seems that so often many of the ongoing mechanisms of traumatization, because we tend not to have a very long historical consciousness in American culture, we miss some of these. But you point to some of these. So, for example, the Nixon administration and the war on drugs, in which that then had intense effects upon incarceration rates, and those incarceration rates related to disproportionately targeting Black young men. What would you say you think are some of the most overlooked or misunderstood or insufficiently considered mechanisms of societal traumatization that you're especially wanting to draw people's attention to?
I use a framework in the book where I talk about the interconnectedness of all of the things that you mentioned, right? So you have racism or injustice that then produces public policy, right? Targeted policing, racial disparities, mass incarceration, which causes broken families, economic divestment, job loss, police violence, community distrust, neglect, and violence on public health as well as education. That then, let's just say even redlining, right? That concentrates poverty in a certain area, right? Where you have a lot of communities of color, in this instance, Black communities, that are still grappling with generational trauma. Grandmaster Flash in the Furious Five has this song where he's like, "Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head." You know, and he's using this talking about, if you go back and listen to that song, all of the things, broken glass everywhere, people in the hallways yelling like they just don't care. He's talking about the social living conditions of what poverty does, hunger, drugs being in the community, crime. There's no economic upward mobility. That's the social living conditions, right? The social living conditions in turn produces trauma, poor health in communities, food deserts, why it's hard for people to access higher education, not access to opportunities in terms of careers, all of these things, like they're interconnected. I'm a product of those environments, right? I was born in the 1980s. I remember the administration that was framing Black communities as welfare queens and getting over on the system, or leveraging an aspect of the GI Bill, which was the GED, right? To say if you get your GED while you're Black, you're lesser than, which is one of the reasons I decided to go back as a fifth-year senior. I remember my mom talking about not having a lot of job opportunities, even though she graduated college from an HBCU and all those things. I grew up in those conditions, right? And so as I've continued to journey forward and have overcome, it's easy for an audience to say, oh, look at that person, they're successful, and try to use one person's success to define millions of others who may still be entrapped in those types of social living conditions, does such grave injustice and has a limited perspective. You can't use one celebrity, one successful person to define a whole generation or a community that is still grappling with the generational social living conditions, poverty, the residue from harsh policies, all of those things. You can't do that. And you have to have a broader perspective.
We'd love to hear some of the ways through either Love Beyond Walls or the Open Doors initiative that you are seeking to address some of these and continue to provide resources for others to make progress.
With Love Beyond Walls, we are servicing those who are unhoused in two ways. One, I call it narrative justice or storytelling advocacy. We launched the first museum in the United States that represents the subject of homelessness. It's called the Dignity Museum. We lead tours and give people a chance to really grapple with some of the more complex subjects. What causes homelessness? How is homelessness not monolithic? How is it unique to every single story? We talk about homelessness being a global issue. There's over 100 million people who have inadequate housing in the entire world. We give people a chance to get proximate to the stories of those who we've helped to transition out of homelessness. We also help people reunite with family members. Sometimes people don't even understand. It's hard to get identification, something as basic as a social security card or a birth certificate, because you need ID to get what? ID, and you need an address to validate who you are as a person. So we do a lot of work around reframing what it means to stand in solidarity with a part of community who's been beloved. We talk about public policy that targets those who are unhoused. But we also have access to public sanitation. We were the organization that went viral for placing hand washing stations in the streets during the height of COVID. We started with 15 in Atlanta, have hand washing stations in over 100 cities across the country. We help people find access to temporary housing until they can get stable. We have a food co-op. Right now, we're building resource centers within the context of Title I schools called Zion's Closet for students who are unhoused, right? I remember being that child. So parents can go into this resource closet and wash clothes. There's washing machines and dryers, access to healthy foods. I remember a student walking in the resource center that we built and didn't have on any socks, and their shoes were broken, and they get a chance to get a fresh pair of shoes, and they weren't able to connect with their lesson because they were so focused on the lack and the immediate need. Wi-Fi labs for parents to come in and fill out job applications because the digital divide is real. Some families don't have access to technology. Even in Louisville, I helped to organize a conference for high school seniors. It was about 50 who were unhoused and about to graduate high school. The first time that they had ever been to a college fair was at this conference. Simmons College was present. The first time some of these students had ever heard about college as an option. The ability to dream beyond maybe living in a motel or living out of a car with their families or even dream of themselves having something to offer. I mean, they've done the hard work of maintaining good grades while going through the worst part of their life. And now they have an opportunity to be inspired by an institution that is giving them an opportunity to say, hey, we're a college and we would love to have you. And so my work is centered around how can I create a world where no one feels invisible, but namely those who have been excluded and pushed to the side. My work is greater than a political conversation. It's about a moral one. It's about how do we do the right thing and show up as a good neighbor. And most times when we talk about loving our neighbors, we also have to love the neighborhood that neighbor emerges from and also be concerned with the challenges that that neighborhood faces.
I have two questions as we move toward a close. One, I'm wondering how you have responded to especially Black conservatives, Black political conservatives, social conservatives who seem to want to reduce problems to, as I read them at least, individual choice and things of that matter. But any thoughts or the ways that you've processed those sorts of critiques?
Do you mind if I read something?
No, please.
So to frame this, I was talking to a group of people about the state of poverty in our world. And, I get the normal poverty is a result of not working hard enough. If you can work, there's no excuse. I thought about the lack of awareness and how easily it is to rely on social constructs that can sometimes impair our perspective and cause greater harm. And I responded to the person with, it's 2025. The federal minimum wage is still $7.25 in 30 states. Could you survive on that with your current lifestyle? And of course, the answer was no. People who believe poverty is about a lack of motivation or financial literacy rarely acknowledge how the systemic nature of poverty itself can impair your progress. Poverty can exhaust you until you have nothing left to give and rob you of your dreams. So I responded by saying this: poverty is not just about income. It's social, it's environmental, it's emotional, it's occupational. Sometimes it's spiritual, it's physiological, it's psychological, and so much more. Coretta Scott King said this, the wife of Martin Luther King: poverty is violence. It doesn't just touch one part of your life, it invades your whole life. And most people don't talk about how poverty itself is a form of trauma. It's traumatic to not have enough and still be expected to perform at your best. It's traumatic to be burdened to the point of breakdown and then be blamed for not having enough. And the truth is, many people living in poverty work incredibly hard. I personally remember my mom working 50 and 60 hours a week and still having more a month at the end of her money. Sometimes I think those who try to blame people have not had enough proximity with those people. And my favorite lines in the scriptures is, and Jesus saw. And I want to be a person of seeing, not using someone's lack or limitation as a reason to define them. So my question is, how do you serve? How do you broaden your perspective? How do you ask, how can I be compassionate in a world where there is so much lack around me?
That's beautifully put. Thank you so much for that. That guides us to the last question I wanted to ask, and you've kind of indicated some of this along the way, but I would ask just kind of as a closing gift to us, as you think about the ways in which you've had to process your own healing and your own processing of those deep traumas that you had as a child. What's been key to you in that? And how would you encourage those who still see their own kind of traumas that they've not yet been able to sufficiently navigate or learn how to navigate?
One of the greatest things that I've learned is finding the courage to name things. And naming your pain is not just a place where you're trying to just vomit out the things that you've been through. I think it is naming it in a way where you can understand it. Some of my greatest strength and my resilience has come from acknowledging the fact that I experienced what I experienced and learning from it, and also realizing that some of the greatest words and treasures and gifts have shaped me, and it has derived from the things that I've experienced. I am who I am because I experienced what I experienced. Also finding a safe community. Obviously, I believe in the power of therapy. One of my grad degrees is in counseling. I'm not saying name it right away, but I'm saying start with a safe community where you can begin to process and say out loud the things that have happened until you find the courage and confidence where you feel vulnerable enough to share. But there's power in vulnerability. Being vulnerable has been a safe haven for me. It's made me a more transparent leader. It has allowed me to connect with other people who are also suffering and realizing that I'm not alone. It has given me such courage to continue to show up and serve those around me. I mean, when I think about my pain, I can't think about my pain without thinking about how God has pulled purpose from it.
Been talking to Dr. Terence Lester, professor at Simmons College in Kentucky, founder of the nonprofit Love Beyond Walls, discussing his latest book, From Dropout to Doctorate. Terence, thank you so much. It's been a beautiful conversation, and so grateful for your work and the sharing with us that you did today and your own exercises of vulnerability. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. I was very honored to be here with you.
Here's one small closing take on our interview with Dr. Terence Lester. 3 beautiful practices toward a good life. 1, the loaning and borrowing of courage and the power of a few faithful strangers. When I asked Terence what were some of the key elements that gave him enough grit or persistence to keep on going rather than lying down in despair or down in self-pity, he said community. And he said, you'll notice in my story, it's not a large community, a room full of people. Like Mr. Eason, Miss West, Mr. Moore, Mr. Artie Shaw. He said, it was the people who allowed me to borrow their courage and belief until I had my own. And then the beautiful story about a man experiencing homelessness, trash hanging from his beard, who saw young Terence coming out of school and said, whatever you do, you're going to have to keep fighting to get your education because one day you'll be a leader. That moment became for Terence a catalyst that a total stranger saw something in him and was calling him to be a leader, even in the midst of his own grief and his own challenging context. So to ask myself, if I need more courage, what might it look like to borrow some? And if I find myself alongside a friend, or maybe even a complete stranger who might need more courage, how might I loan them some of my own? Second, this beautiful challenge to become a questionary, maybe even more than a visionary, to dare become someone who asks hard questions. Third, to make sanctuaries where learning and healing can happen. The story of a teacher after he went back to school as a 5th-year continuing student in high school, and the teacher who invited young Terence to use her classroom as a sanctuary where she would mentor him, tutor him, help him make his way through, that she became, Terence said, his greatest source of inspiration. So how might we make available sanctuaries for others? What do we have at hand? It's only a classroom, somebody might say. No, it might just be a sanctuary. And whatever you have at hand might also just be a sanctuary. That's a small, but not so small take on today's episode. Peace to you, my friend. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with scholar and activist Dr. Terence Lester. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carriet Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.